Officer Daniels and his team thought it would be a routine call, but inside a crumbling house they uncovered 13-year-old Emily, trapped by a predator who had lived among unsuspecting neighbors for years. The story begins on a quiet suburban street where life seemed normal and predictable. Families felt safe letting their children play outside, and neighbors waved as they went about their daily routines. It was the kind of place where bad news rarely traveled, and people trusted that the community was untouched by the dangers they usually only heard about on the evening news. But in the shadows of this calm environment, something sinister was taking shape. The first signs came in the form of a call to the local police department. The caller did not give their name, but their voice carried urgency. They reported that something disturbing was happening inside a small, run-down house at the far end of the neighborhood. The words were clear: a child might be trapped there. For the officers receiving the report, disbelief was their first reaction. How could something so horrifying take place in a town known for its peace and safety? Yet, there was something in the tone of the caller that made it impossible to dismiss. The dispatcher relayed the details, and within minutes, patrol cars were on the move. Their sirens stayed silent to avoid drawing attention, but the flashing lights reflected off windows as they approached the address. The house in question was easy to overlook during the day. Tucked away on a corner lot, its faded paint and neglected yard gave it an abandoned look. But that night, as the officers slowed to a stop outside, they noticed a faint glow leaking through the blinds. The sight raised questions. If the house was supposed to be empty, why was there light inside? The officers stepped out cautiously, scanning their surroundings. The night air was still, yet there was a feeling of unease that none of them could shake. One officer circled the property, noticing details that others might have missed: windows boarded up with uneven planks, locks setted to exterior doors, and trash piled along the side of the house. These were not the signs of a regular home. They were signals that someone wanted to keep outsiders away. As backup arrived, the group of officers gathered near the front entrance, preparing to make entry. No one spoke aloud, but the tension was clear in their movements. Each of them knew that what waited inside could change everything. What had started as an anonymous call was quickly becoming a mystery that carried the weight of something far darker than they had imagined. The house stood before the officers like a secret waiting to be exposed. From a distance, it looked neglected but harmless, the kind of place people ignored when passing by. Up close, however, the warning signs were impossible to miss. The blinds were bent at odd angles, as though someone had tried to block prying eyes. The yard was overgrown, with weeds climbing high enough to swallow the porch steps. A faint buzzing came from a single outdoor light that flickered unevenly, casting eerie shadows on the cracked walls. Nothing about the house suggested comfort or warmth. It was more like a shell hiding something no one wanted to see. The officers approached carefully, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Each step closer made the silence around them heavier, as if the night itself was holding its breath. They pressed their ears against the door, but heard nothing. Then, one officer noticed a strange smell escaping through a gap in the wood. It was sour, stale, and sharp enough to sting. Whatever was inside had been there too long. With a quick nod, they forced the door open. The hinges screamed, and the stale air rushed outward, carrying with it an odor that confirmed their fears. Inside, the scene was worse than expected. The living room was a mess of overturned furniture and trash scattered across the floor. Old clothes were stuffed into corners, and food containers sat rotting on a coffee table. The wallpaper peeled away in strips, revealing stains that had seeped into the walls over time. The house felt abandoned, yet the dim light from a lamp in the corner told another story: someone was still living there. As they pushed deeper, their footsteps echoed on the wooden floor, each creak magnified in the tense silence. One hallway stretched toward the back of the house. The officers moved cautiously, shining their lights into rooms as they passed. Some doors were open, revealing bare mattresses, broken chairs, and piles of belongings with no order or reason. Others were shut, as if holding something back. The atmosphere grew more suffocating with every turn, and the sense of being watched crept into their minds. Then came the faintest sound, soft, almost like a whisper. It wasn't enough to make out clearly, but it was enough to draw them forward. They exchanged quick glances, unspoken agreement urging them to continue. Somewhere deeper inside that house was the answer, and possibly someone who didn't want to be found. At the very end of the hallway stood a door that looked different from the rest. It was heavier, reinforced with an extra lock, and bore fresh scratches near the handle, as though someone had tried to claw their way out. The officers paused, the silence on the other side more unsettling than the noise they had faintly heard before. With a single strike, the door gave way, splintering open to reveal the room that would later haunt every person who entered it. The first thing they saw was a small figure huddled in the corner. A 13-year-old child sat on the floor, surrounded by clutter that suggested weeks of confinement. The air inside was stifling, thick with the smell of damp clothes, spoiled food, and fear. The windows had been sealed shut with boards and heavy nails, leaving no trace of daylight. The walls were bare except for crude markings, scratches that told the silent story of time spent waiting, hoping, and counting the days. Nearby, empty food wrappers and bottles hinted at meals carelessly tossed in, with no regard for comfort or dignity. The officers quickly moved in, their flashlights sweeping across the room to take in every detail. What they found confirmed that this was not a random incident, but a carefully constructed prison. Chains were bolted into the floor, positioned in such a way that escape was nearly impossible. A dirty mattress lay against the wall, covered in thin blankets that offered little warmth. On a small desk sat notebooks filled with disturbing writings and drawings that pointed to a mind consumed by control and obsession. The child looked exhausted, their face pale and thin, but there was a flicker of relief as the door broke open. Though fragile and frightened, the spark of survival was still present. The officers moved quickly to free them from the restraints, knowing every second counted. At that moment, the mission shifted from investigation to rescue, and the weight of what they had uncovered sank in. Had the tip not been made, the story could have ended differently. The signs of long-term planning were everywhere, suggesting that the predator responsible had intended to keep the child hidden for much longer. The thought chilled everyone present. This wasn't just a crime scene. It was evidence of a nightmare that could have continued in silence, just blocks away from unsuspecting neighbors who had no idea of the darkness festering so close to their homes. With the child safely carried out of the room, the investigation turned toward the predator who had created such a chilling trap. Every corner of the house became a puzzle piece, each item hinting at the kind of mind capable of orchestrating this horror. The officers discovered fake identification cards tucked inside a drawer, each with a different name and photograph. Alongside them were receipts from bus stations and motels in nearby towns, evidence that the man behind this crime had been moving frequently, never staying in one place long enough to raise suspicion. It was clear he had studied how to vanish, preparing for the possibility that one day someone might come knocking. In the basement, a hidden entrance caught their attention. Beneath loose boards and stacks of old boxes was a stairwell leading to a narrow underground space. The officers descended carefully, flashlights illuminating the walls. What they found made it clear this house had been more than a hiding place. It had been a headquarters for planning. Racks of clothing in various styles and sizes, wigs, and even makeup kits were neatly arranged as though for quick transformations. Shelves held prepaid cell phones, passports from different countries, and envelopes stuffed with cash in multiple currencies. The predator had prepared for multiple lives, each one ready to be assumed at a moment's notice. The deeper they searched, the more unsettling the discoveries became. A locked trunk contained disturbing photographs, maps marked with potential destinations, and a ledger that appeared to track movements and targets. The realization was horrifying. This was not a first-time offense. The predator had likely carried out similar acts in other towns, leaving behind no trace except frightened victims too afraid or unable to come forward. Each detail uncovered added to the urgency of capturing him before he could escape again. Neighbors later recalled how he blended into the community with ease. He kept to himself, spoke politely when approached, and even showed up at small neighborhood events, where no one would have suspected his true intentions. The contrast between his public image and the hidden reality inside the house was almost too much to comprehend. The officers left with armfuls of evidence, knowing it would take weeks to piece together the full scope of his activities. But one fact was certain: the predator was more than a local threat. He was a drifter with a system, and every sign suggested he had no plans of stopping until someone forced him to. The manhunt stretched across the city as officers scrambled to locate the predator before he could slip away for good. With his false identities and carefully laid escape routes, the challenge was immense. Detectives followed every lead from the evidence collected in the house, focusing on the bank withdrawals and bus station receipts that hinted at his movements. Surveillance footage soon revealed him moving through crowded terminals with calculated ease, dressed in a disguise that made him almost unrecognizable. He carried only a small bag, which investigators believe contained the essentials he had prepared: cash, documents, and tools to disappear once more. Every hour that passed made the possibility of him escaping more real. The breakthrough came when a sharp-eyed officer spotted a clue hidden in the notebooks recovered from the house. Among the pages of scribbled plans was a sketch of a nearby industrial warehouse. It seemed insignificant at first, but investigators decided to check it out. When officers arrived, they found signs that someone had recently burned their discarded food containers, cigarette butts, and footprints in the dust. The predator had been using the warehouse as a temporary stop before making his next move. The net tightened quickly, roadblocks were set up, and plainclothes officers spread out across the area. The city became a grid of checkpoints designed to leave him nowhere to run. His capture was sudden and decisive. Cornered in a parking lot not far from the warehouse, he attempted to flee on foot, but was quickly taken down. The arrest stunned those who had known him only as the quiet man living alone. For neighbors who had waved politely at him or stood beside him in grocery store lines, the truth was nearly impossible to accept. The friendly Fod had masked someone who had been preparing for years to carry out unthinkable crimes. With the predator behind bars, attention shifted back to the rescued child. Medical teams and counselors began the long process of helping them recover from weeks of captivity. The community rallied in support, donating resources and offering comfort, though nothing could erase the trauma completely. Investigators later revealed that the anonymous tip which sparked the rescue had come from someone who noticed troubling online activity tied to the predator's alias. That small act of awareness had broken the case wide open and saved a life. The story left the town shaken, serving as a haunting reminder that evil often hides in plain sight. Behind ordinary appearances, darkness can grow unnoticed until the moment it is exposed. This time, vigilance and swift action ensured that one more predator was stopped before they could vanish again.